of tactical programs and apps and stuff and metric tracking are now changed by the way that, these just earlier this week, these relatively minor changes have rolled out. So it's part of the blessing and the curse of working in this space is the pace of change, and it'll be interesting to see how this impacts marketers.
David, do you have enough Zuckerberg to put a thought together on that?
Well, it's funny, our whole team's out there. We have a big team here and a big team out there. It's just exciting to see the rate of change that Facebook's going after in terms of publishing activities, sharing data, sharing products, sharing information. And I think, for us building our marketing suite on top of Facebook, that just opens up a lot more things that we can offer our clients. So it's exciting for everybody who's using Facebook as a way to connect with customers, friends, through your personal use or through your business use too. So it's just going to increase that level of interactivity that we can bring to our clients.
Yeah, I also think that not having seen exactly what all the stuff they're announcing, but one of the things within sort of social is kind of categorization of what you're potentially doing. And Facebook's been good at that, but I feel that with some of the read, watch, listen buttons, etc., that categorization becomes a lot easier. So from a metrics perspective, that information can be categorized in a very simple, easy to use way. There's been many ways to potentially sort of implicitly categorize that information, but now that I can do that very explicitly, I could build some pretty rich behavioral profiles for people that potentially did not exist. So from an advertising perspective, that data that they have on you becomes even richer, and potentially for marketers, probably a higher ROI.
So thank you for using the M word. I'll use that as
marketers.
Metrics.
Metrics. Oh yeah.
I've used a few of them. I could have been more specific, but we're going to use that as a segue to dive right in to our focus on metrics that matter. So one of my favorite things to talk about, or to kick off a conversation about metrics, is this phrase that I've used a lot, and it seems really apt in the social media space more so than a lot of the other areas of our industry. And it seems that we're trying to figure out how much somebody weighs using a yardstick. So do you guys think that that's the state of where we're at in measuring social media? Or are we a little bit further along than that? Exactly how messed up and ugly is the social media measurement landscape, I guess, is the question.
What is a fan worth?
What is a fan worth?
Well, just following on my previous point, it's all moving so fast that, I don't beat up us in the industry for still trying to get our hands around it. Obviously Buddy Media and Vitru and a number of, platforms are out there moving at an extremely fast pace. Millward Brown, ComScore, Nielsen have been doing things in measurement. The company I work for, Marketing Evolution, we're making a big push there. We're all dancing as fast as we can. I came out of the banner ad space for more than 10 years, and honestly, most people still aren't measuring that very well.
Well, that's your fault. We all measure clicks.
That is your fault.
Not my fault.
No,
double click. Yeah. The click has some value, but just like this stuff that we're looking at, the number of fans. It's not the metric, but it's a relevant metric. I'm sure we're going to elaborate a little bit. I don't want to hog the conversation, but I think it's developing rapidly, and there are interesting learnings emerging, but it's still so new that I don't really want to pile on and fault us for not having the magic answers all worked out quite yet.
Well, I think it's come a long way too. I think back to like 12 months ago where we're out talking to clients and everyone was just focused on fan growth. I just want fans. I want to grow my fans. My fan growth is the measure of my popularity on Facebook. And a lot of people have gotten fans. That's great, but we're starting to think about how do you go beyond that. How do you measure engagement? How do you measure engagement in content that you have in your tabs? How do you measure engagement in terms of what you're posting out on your wall? And then how do you take that even a step further and say, okay, how is that content being shared? How is it being commented on? How is that share then resulting in incremental sales? and just keeping it going further and further and further, where now we just launched a product called Conversion Buddy where we can actually measure the ROI on social activity and measure that back to the ultimate sale. And that's something that, I work with a lot of, that was just not working very well. Is that better?
No.
Is this better?
Do you want mine? I can be loud and obnoxious without a mic.
Let's see, is that turned on?
Here. Why don't you try this one? It's obviously very hot. You want to switch seats? Sure. Oh, there we go. All right. Sorry. This would never happen to Mark Zuckerberg.
All right, so there we go. Where was I talking? So just in the last 12 months, you think about, I cover a lot of retail clients, and everyone was talking about likes and fans, and now we're talking more about engagement. We're talking about how you engage with tab content, how you engage with wall content, your publishing streams, understanding when's the best time to post, and then taking that a step further, saying, okay, what's the value of a share? What's shared content, and how do I measure shared content, particularly about products, then back to some ROI measurement on incremental sales. So we have new products that we've just launched, and Conversion Buddy is one of them, where we can actually measure incremental ROI or just ROI from social activity, and most importantly, just sharing content that ultimately leads to more sales, and that's extremely important for particularly brands that have significant e-commerce activity.
So we have a slightly different take on this, which is the social space. So you have new platforms sort of coming into play every day, and every single platform tends to have new metrics associated with it. So there's really, if you sort of look at the landscape, there's really three drivers of fragmentation within social. And social clearly is broader than Facebook. Obviously, Facebook is the biggest one. They own our social graph, and that's not necessarily going to go away. But the three drivers are, the first one is you've got a plethora of these listening solutions. Everyone uses sort of buzz and sentiment as sort of the key indicator. The problem with that is that it's not really measuring the quality of conversation. They're, again, just measuring reach frequency. And there's quite a bit of those out there. And those metrics, if you talk to marketers, those metrics are still fairly alien to sort of marketers, because the output of those metrics is being housed in either corporate communications or PR or marketing, but not the insights folks, and that's kind of a big issue. The second is platform, the metrics you get from platforms. So the example is sort of likes or shares. They're agnostic to that platform itself, and a like essentially is sort of just an intention. It's an expression of an intention. What you don't know is, why did I like a specific piece of content? What did I do after I liked that piece of content? Those are some unanswered questions, and that leads to a lot of sort of fragmentation. And the third bit, and the company I work for, Dynamic Logic and Millward Brown, we're as guilty of this as anybody else, because we've got brand studies on top. So you've got brand studies, platform metrics, and you've got these listing solutions. Nobody's sort of tying those three pieces together. Yes, you can put all that stuff in a dashboard, but unless and until you know how, if your brand favorability is changing, what is sort of the cousin for that metric in the behavioral space, in the social space, that some of those changes, even if you're measuring on the social space, they're not going to sort of matter. So what we've been doing over the past couple of months is really trying to figure out how we can take traditional metrics, if I use traditional metrics like brand awareness, brand favorability, purchase intent, metrics that everybody's used to, metrics where some key decisions are made, how can I tie that metric, correlate that one-to-one to potentially a social share, to your loyalty database? Then I can start to value things like value of a fan. I can start to say that if my favorability is not moving, okay, what metric do I need to look at in the social space or in the behavioral space to try to connect those two things together? That is really, we think is sort of the future.
No, if I understand correctly, I think the folks at Open Amplify might actually disagree that we're not able to do some of the things you were just talking about. I was chatting with them a little bit earlier today, not in a terrible amount of detail, but it seems like they're pretty bent on pulling in a lot of this disparate social data and getting some really meaningful insight out of it. Are you competing with some of these platform folks? Or do you feel like you're competing with them in the marketplace for insight?
We work with OpenAmplify, so that's and we have a good relationship with them. Potentially there's potentially some competition, but from our perspective, we want to be the best storytellers. So we don't really want to own the data. We want to basically use as much data as we can to basically tell the most compelling story. But the really important part is the data is not the problem. You get data from everywhere. I mean, the amount of data that's being generated primarily because of social platforms, and considering what Facebook is going to announce today, is going to be tremendous. It's what you do with that data. And how you tie that data together back to sort of either planning systems or decision-making systems that you already have in place, that's really the key. And if you're not really doing that for your businesses, I think that's where I think the lost opportunity is. And Porter Gale mentioned that from Virgin this morning, where they actually, what they did was they have potentially in their loyalty database identified who's a fan and who's not a fan. That's actually very interesting because now you could potentially value a fan. You can understand, you can track those people and put a quantification on how those, on how, how they became, and then do some research to figure out, okay, how they became a fan and then how much extra are they spending. So yeah, we like to work with everybody.
Yeah, I would just chime in here that, a lot of what you're saying, Ali, also resonates with the way we're looking at things. The more data, I'm interested to look at all the data. There's a point at which everybody has a different, type of data they're looking at, and you feel like you're describing, blind men describing an elephant, just looking at different pieces of the whole. We try to take a very holistic approach to trying to find common denominator measures that we can compare to other media. The legacy that marketing evolution has come out of is putting on an even playing field, television, print, display, up until now search and digital in other forms, and social is just a piece of that. I look at one distinction we should make, obviously, people love the acronym PO, paid, owned, earned, and maybe we can get into that in a little bit more detail, but paid being the advertising platforms like on Facebook advertising or promoted tweets on Twitter and so forth is more complicated and differentiated than just banner ads, but it's fairly straightforward in some ways to understand how that works. But in terms of owned, what is the value of a fan, the models that we've been developing and framing our thinking look at two ways that value is created. One is what we call the momentum effect, or the pass along to the reach of the friends of the fans. So there's an assumption that the fans already have expressed their affinity for the brand. And I'm going to come back to that as my point too, really what is the impact of that relationship on the people who fan. But there's a lot of interest. ComScore published a paper recently together with Facebook looking at this, suggesting that the real value is in the ability to tap the friends of the fans through the kind of activity of, somebody likes a post and that goes into the news feed of their friends. And particularly if you have sponsored stories turned on, which, the way I'm looking at the world is really the magic pixie dust of Facebook advertising is turning on that feature that amplifies that out to virtually all of the friends of a fan. So it broadens that reach very much. And, published research, that we've done ourselves as well as from Nielsen and ComScore make a convincing case that there is a real brand impact in seeing Rick likes the Pepsi video in my friend's news feed. And in fact, even at a higher rate of impact than seeing a Pepsi ad on Facebook because of that word of mouth friend to friend piece.
So would you call that message resonance?
That's not the term we've been using, but I think
Sure.
it's a descriptive term.
Well, there was a term that somebody else was using that I was reading last night. and they had said, it's not about reach and frequency, it's about message resonance. And if you leave that out, you're just doing CRM and PR.
I think it's also about reach. I mean, I wouldn't kid yourself. It may not only be about reach and frequency, but those are pretty foundational to the impact of how we understand media impacting people. But yeah, that personal endorsement component is part of the real, magic sauce for, social media for advertisers.
So what about the quality of, instead of quantity, what about the quality of the conversation, the quality of the user? How do we move to focusing more on qualitative rather than quantitative? Because we were talking out in the hall about how easy it is to count stuff. You raise your hand, you're great, I'm in. But it doesn't necessarily tell you anything much more than a baseline.
Well, I think, what we look at is a combination of being able to provide, there's almost a value exchange that you can do on our, through using our platform and by, say, liking a page on Facebook. You have to give your fans, you have to give your potential customers something of value, whether that's exclusive content, whether that's, we have one daily deal site we do. If you're on Facebook, you get access to a sale through our platform an hour before anyone else will through their .com. Fashion brands you could go to a exclusive fashion show through our tab development. And this stuff results in incremental sales we know it, and we can measure that. We worked with one luxury brand where we did a product launch for them and did a sampling sale for them exclusively on Facebook. It sold out in 12 hours. So a lot of people talk about theoretical data. I mean, we have actual data that shows this stuff's working. And people are going to Facebook to get when they're loyal to a brand, and that brand gives them something of value, gives them access, gives them things you can't get anywhere else. That's resulting in real dollars, affinity, loyalty, and sales. And you talked before about paid, owned, and earned. Through really honing up your owned media, meaning your Facebook page, you can drive so much earned media and so much incremental sales. And if you can really galvanize that all together, we had one sports apparel brand do a product launch, again, offering exclusive access to that product through Facebook. But then they had stuff going on YouTube, they had stuff going on, print, TV, all driving to Facebook. And then, they just saw huge increase in numbers of fans, engagement, and sales. So it's not like this sort of stuff is theoretically maybe happening. It's happening, and it's really exciting time right now. And if you don't offer that value exchange, if you don't offer that exclusivity, there's no value to a person liking your page. So that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with that, and Rick made the point as well, which is your fans. If for a brand, if you become a fan of a brand, it's not because that brand's on Facebook. Right? So Facebook is essentially the platform that's helping connect those two. It's because they certainly have had some predisposition or affinity towards a brand. So Facebook is not creating these fans, and that's, if you talk to Facebook, they'll say they'll say the same thing, and it's sort of contrary to kind of some of the messaging that's in the marketplace. But we've done some research around, okay, well the idea then obviously is, okay, how can I add incremental I can generate incremental value for somebody that becomes a fan. So because a like is not really a love, right? That's a very important distinction, is how can you take somebody from a like to a love? And we've done some work with the World Federation of Advertisers looking at about 35 brand pages across the world actually, and then that's converted itself into a solution that we're offering. But some of the things we find is an acronym we use called civics, or like community. People they join a fan page because they want to be part of a community. They join a fan page because they want that interaction with other fans, and how that interaction is being promoted by the community managers of that page. They want a lot of variety in the content. They want to make sure that I get something special. Because I'm a fan and my friend is not a fan, I know something that my brand, my friend, or my friend doesn't know. So give me something special. And obviously, and this is kind of a price to play on Facebook, is contests and giveaways. I want to, I give me something back, because everybody on Facebook considers themselves an influencer, whether or not you are or not is certainly up for debate. But because I'm on Facebook and I'm now friends with you as a brand, I certainly have that ability. The other thing we find is that, Facebook versus Twitter versus some of the other platforms, people have invested a lot in Facebook, in that social graph. So the amount of trust that they have within that social graph within Facebook is actually greater than some of the other platforms that are out in the space. So if I'm fanning somebody, or if I'm friends with a brand, I'm letting you in that circle of trust. It's up to you, the brand, to be able to sort of take that relationship further. And that's where some of the programs you guys are doing really certainly help with that.
Well, and if you also look at, where, let's say, I work with a lot of luxury brands, right? So you look at where they are from their fan base. You look at, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Burberry. They've got 6 million fans, 5 million fans, 4 million fans. You look at Vogue, GQ, maybe 250,000 fans. So now all these luxury brands have a platform in which they can develop their own content. They can, this is a way for them to almost take what they've done through, obviously they're not going to stop advertising in Vogue and GQ, but they now have an ability to even take it a step further. And you look at what Oscar de la Renta is doing on Facebook. They are just constantly giving their fans just awesome content around Fashion Week, around new dresses that Oscar's making, around new shoes. And their fans love it. They share it, they tweet it, and they're just doing a really good job of really surfacing that type of content that their fans love. So yeah, to a certain extent, they've got their likes, but they've also got their loves. And then you can use data products to really measure who are those people who are in love with you, because they're going to be, sharing and tweeting and doing all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I really do think it's a special platform, Facebook in particular, as we've seen it, and it will be interesting to see how this new stuff plays into that as well. But, everybody has a web page. All brands have a web page, and all brands have an email list. And, but this is almost epitomizes a CRM kind of relationship that I think advertisers want to have, that, the people are already on the platform all the time anyway, and the platform's designed to tickle them, tickle their interest all the time, and you can engage, the people in ways besides just articles and so forth that you'd put on your website, where you don't have that sort of captive return nature to it, or the almost invasive push aspect of email. It really is an opportunity, I think, to engage people in a particularly impactful way. And we are looking at, while I agree that somebody fans the page in the first place because they already have an affinity for the brand, I do definitely believe that relationship can have a measurable impact on moving them from being a fan to a super fan, or from a like to a love in their relationship. As they learn more about product diversity and new products coming out, and they understand the corporate values, and they feel like they're an insider, and they get exposed to things before the general public. And it is measurable. What we're doing is right now we've got a process in place that we're productizing, where we're comparing people who fan on day one to people who have been fan for 90 days, and ask them the same kind of brand assessment that we do for other media, about their familiarity, about their purchase intentions and so forth, and compare what somebody who has been now a fan for 90 days thinks about the brand relative to somebody who, is the identical audience segment, because they've also taken that action to like the brand, but we try to capture them on that first or second day after that liking, and then measurably see what is the impact on their brand attitudes, after they've been a fan for a period of time.
I want to ask a couple, before we dive into a couple of specific metrics, and I know we're short on time, but I do want to ask, so in the poem, paid, owned, earned, where should marketers be focusing their efforts right now and get sort of where can they get the most ROI, and is that changing? Right? I mean, it used to seem that you had the most control in the paid, and then we invented PR and social media, and earned and owned became a much bigger part of the component. But where do they have the best chance of getting more fans, if that's the metric, or selling more cars, if that's your objective?
I think it's a mix of both. It can't be an either or. It certainly is a combination, and I think your fans, let's go there, are open to that kind of experimentation. Starbucks, JetBlue, all of them do an extreme Starwood. They all do an extremely good job of sort of trying out different things in the space. So I feel it's certainly a combination. But having said that, I think it's very, very important to understand what are some of the expectations of your fans. Half the time, a lot of the work that we've done, we find that there's actually a very large disconnect between what fans are expecting and what you're delivering. And that's impossible to get if you're using metrics like likes or how many shares they have. Because I think those behavioral metrics are great, but essentially that's what they are. They're certainly, you need a little bit more depth. And you could potentially do that by just trying to understand your audience a little bit better. Why did I become a fan? Is it because I want to be part of a community? Is it because I have something to say? I want to be listened to? And how am I reacting to some of the content that you're putting out there? So clearly, I think it's a mixture of some of the behavior stuff, and then also a mixture of attitudinal and sales stuff that you can link to.
Yeah, and just if I could add to that, just not only reacting to the content you're putting out there, but also participating.
Yeah.
You talked about contests before. I mean, we really see that the smart brands that are using contests in the right way are involving their customers in the contest process. So, by crowdsourcing, voting, involving them in the outcome, having a big reveal that you could do on Facebook to announcing a winner, stuff like that. That's gonna, that doesn't cost anymore. You don't have to pay any paid media to drive that, because people are going to get excited. People are going to enter. People are going to participate, upload photos of themselves, vote among finalists. Pair up two finalists and vote them through to the next round. That kind of stuff is
leveraging your own media to drive your earned media.
Yeah, I mean that's basically just using own media to drive earned media, and you don't have to spend any extra paid media to do it. It's just being really smart about how you can structure something as easy as a contest to involve your fans and make it a conversation and a participatory thing, rather than plastering something up there and then people just react to it. You want them involved. You want them to be part of the actual content itself.
I think this was mentioned a couple of times in the morning sessions, but the concept of having really professional copywriting is really the key, because most of the time on Facebook, the only way that the brand is interacting with their fans is through the news feed. And I don't know what that looks like now, timeline, etc. But clearly that architecture is potentially not going to change. So some of the brands that we work with, they actually have conversational calendars set up for the next 12 months on either a weekly basis or a daily basis, and that goes through a fairly iterative process of, okay, this is something that's going to resonate. That will help build, as much as I hate using the word engagement, but certainly it will do that within your fan base.
Okay, very fast lightning round before we kill us for going long. I want to ask you about some very specific metrics, and let's just get a primary or secondary as an answer, or tertiary, on if it should be how important a metric should be. Sentiment. Positive, negative mentions for brand, product, service, or whatever.
Secondary.
I think it can be primary, but if used in the right way. I know that's more than what you wanted. Sorry.
Secondary, tough to measure.
Referring sites, where your clicks are coming, where your fans and clicks are coming from.
Oh, I guess I'd say primary. I mean, very important.
Okay, I would say it's a secondary metric. You could figure that out. Yeah.
Primary.
Thank you for playing along.
Yeah. Nice.
Engagement duration.
Nice.
Primary.
Primary. Depends on how you define engagement. Sorry. I have an issue with that word.
So do I, but we don't have time for
Yeah,
that.
we don't have time for that.
Conversions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty critical one. Depending, I mean, trackable, presumably if you're more in a direct marketing world, I suppose.
Yeah.
And last one, virality. Shareability.
Not as high as conversion, but almost as high.
Yeah, I agree. It is tough to measure though. It is tough to measure, especially if you're going across platforms, etc. It becomes a little bit tougher to measure consistently. But I would say not as high as conversion.
Well, what is not tough to measure is how behind schedule we are. And so for the sake of that, I want to thank you guys for keeping a dry subject relatively exciting.